Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. The darkness no one saw coming. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The Arrival. The cicadas, Havenwood's usual summer orchestra, had fallen silent. An unnatural quiet hung heavy in the air, broken only by the unsettling creak of Sarah Miller's tires on sun-baked asphalt. Havenwood, once a picture-perfect postcard of Americana, now felt like a faded photograph, the colors leached by a forgotten hand. 5 years had passed since Sarah last walked these streets. Back then, fireflies winked like celestial promises, and Mrs. Peabody's roses bloomed in riotous color. Now, the flower beds lay choked with weeds, their petals the sickly brown of decay. A stray dog, ribs stark against its matted fur, watched Sarah with hollow eyes before slinking into the shadows. Havenwood hadn't changed. It had rotted. An unsettling prickling crawled up Sarah's spine. It wasn't just the oppressive heat or the unnatural quiet. It was a deeper unease, a sense of unseen eyes watching from behind peeling wallpaper and dusty window panes. She parked across from her childhood home, a Victorian mansion that seemed to hunch under the weight of untold secrets. The porch swing, once a scene of carefree laughter, hung motionless, its chains groaning in the wind that nobody felt. As Sarah reached for the doorknob, a sudden chill snaked down her arm, leaving gooseflesh in its wake. A flicker of movement caught her eye. A black cat, impossibly thin and silent, stalked across the street, its emerald eyes glowing with an unnatural brilliance. It paused, its gaze fixed on Sarah with an intensity that sent a tremor of fear through her. Then, with a sinuous grace that defied nature, it melted into the shadows of Mrs. Henderson's rose garden, leaving behind the faint metallic tang of blood. Panic clawed at Sarah's throat. The cat, it was wrong, a predator cloaked in fur, its hunger a chilling echo of the disquiet gnawing at her soul. Taking a shaky breath, Sarah forced herself to unlock the door. Creaked open with a rusty groan, the sound swallowed by the suffocating silence of the house. As she stepped inside, a draft slammed the door shut behind her with a bone-jarring thud. Darkness, thick and suffocating, pressed in from all sides. Sarah fumbled for her phone, its weak flashlight beam a mere pinprick against the encroaching shadows. Then, a sound, a soft scratching, like claws on wood, coming from somewhere high in the darkness. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Havenwood wasn't just different, it felt hungry. And in the oppressive silence, she could almost hear it whisper, "Welcome home, Sarah." Chapter 2. Whispers in the Dark. The scratching reached a fever pitch, a frantic symphony of claws against wood. Sarah stumbled back, phone clutched in her hand, its feeble light revealing nothing but the yawning maw of darkness that consumed the house. With a heart-stopping thud, the scratching abruptly ceased, replaced by a chilling silence that pressed down on her like a physical weight. Terror coiled in Sarah's gut, leaving a taste of bile on her tongue. Taking a shaky breath, she forced herself forward, inch by agonizing inch, towards the faint glow emanating from the living room window. Moonlight, filtered through dusty curtains, cast an eerie luminescence across the room, revealing a scene from a forgotten nightmare. Furniture lay overturned, cushions ripped open, stuffing spilling like grotesque entrails. A broken picture frame lay shattered on the floor, the faded photograph within depicting a smiling Sarah, a younger, happier version, holding hands with a boy with eyes that seemed to hold a hint of something sinister. A guttural growl erupted from the shadows, sending a fresh wave of terror through Sarah. She whirled around, phone light desperately searching the darkness. Nothing. But then, as the adrenaline subsided, a suffocating pressure settled in the room. The air felt thick, charged with something malevolent. Suddenly, the house lights flickered back to life, bathing the room in a harsh, sterile white that did little to dispel the lingering dread. Sarah stumbled back, knocking over a chair with a crash that echoed through the now silent house. The sudden sound felt jarring, a violent intrusion into the unnatural stillness. The front door creaked open. Sarah spun around, heart pounding against her ribs. A silhouette filled the doorway, a tall, gaunt figure, framed by the moonlight spilling in from the porch. Relief flooded her, momentarily washing away the terror. "Mr. Evans?" she croaked, her voice hoarse with fear. The figure stepped into the room, the light revealing a man with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners and a shock of white hair that seemed to defy gravity. He wore a tweed jacket that hung loosely on his thin frame, and his brow furrowed in concern. "Miss Sarah?" I heard a commotion and thought his voice trailed off as he took in the scene of destruction. His eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with a mixture of fear and something akin to grim understanding. "Mr. Evans, what's going on?" Sarah pleaded, her voice trembling. "This isn't right." He sighed, a deep breath that seemed to carry the weight of years. "It seems Havenwood has awoken," he said finally, his voice a low rumble. "A darkness stirs, one that hasn't shown its face in generations." Sarah stared at him, a chilling premonition creeping into her mind. "Darkness," she whispered, the word leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. "An old evil, Sarah," Mr. Evans said, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the shattered picture frame. "An evil that has waited for you." Chapter 3: Clawing Shadows. Sarah's mind reeled. Mr. Evans' words echoed in the silence. "An evil that has waited for you." What darkness lurked in Havenwood, and why would it target her? Before she could question him further, a cacophony of shouts and sirens erupted from outside. Rushing to the window, Sarah saw Havenwood in chaos. Streetlights flickered erratically, casting long, distorted shadows that danced on the panicked faces below. Cars honked, their headlights adding to the surreal scene. A fire truck screeched to a halt, its siren a desperate wail against the encroaching darkness. "The power's out, all over town," Mr. Evans said, his voice grim. "Seems the darkness isn't content to stay confined to your house." As they joined the throngs of people spilling out onto the street, Sarah felt a prickling sensation at the back of her neck. The usual comfort of familiar faces was gone, replaced by a palpable sense of fear. A woman, Mrs. Abernathy, who lived 2 doors down, clutched her chest, her face pale with terror. It's closing in," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "Can't you feel it? The walls, they're closing in." Sarah watched in horror as Mrs. Abernathy crumpled to the ground, clawing at the air as if trapped in a box. A young man, Billy Thompson, known for his obsessive cleanliness, began scrubbing his hands with an imaginary disinfectant, muttering about germs and contamination. Panic threatened to engulf Sarah. This wasn't just a power outage. This darkness, it fed on fear, twisting individual anxieties into nightmarish realities. Mr. Evans, however, seemed oddly calm. He placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, grounding her with his steady presence. "We need to get to the library," he said, his voice firm. "There's something there, an old book that might shed light on this darkness." They fought their way through the panicked crowd, the darkness clinging to the periphery of their vision, a suffocating presence that seemed to amplify every sound. Flashlights sputtered and died, their meager light swallowed by the encroaching gloom. Generators sputtered to life, only to cough and wheeze, spewing black smoke into the already oppressive air. Reaching the library, a haven of light in the growing darkness, felt like a small victory. Mr. Evans led Sarah through the labyrinthine stacks, the scent of aged paper and leather offering a strange comfort. Finally, he pulled out a heavy, leather-bound tome with arcane symbols etched on its cover. As Sarah brushed away cobwebs and gingerly opened the book, a wave of cold air washed over her. The pages, filled with spidery handwriting and crude illustrations, spoke of a forgotten ritual, an entity of pure darkness that thrived on fear, and a single, desperate measure to banish it. A surge of hope, fragile but persistent, bloomed in Sarah's chest. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to fight back against this nightmare. But as she and Mr. Evans delved deeper into the book, the shadows outside seemed to writhe and twist, their tendrils reaching towards the library windows, whispering promises of terror and despair. It was clear that darkness wouldn't give up its claim on Havenwood without a fight. Chapter 4. Whispers from the Depths. The library, once a haven, felt like a flimsy shield against the growing darkness. As Sarah and Mr. Evans pored over the ancient text, the shadows outside seemed to writhe with a malevolent life of their own. The book spoke of a forgotten cult, the children of the eternal night, who worshipped an entity of pure darkness called the Tenebris. According to the text, the Tenebris dwelled in a forgotten place, a place where the sun's rays never dared to reach. Their rituals, a grotesque mixture of sacrifice and self-flagellation, aimed to appease the entity and maintain its power. But something had gone terribly wrong. The Tenebris, it seemed, had broken free of its bindings, unleashing its suffocating darkness upon Havenwood. Mr. Evans slammed the book shut, his face etched with a mixture of horror and grim determination. "There's a place mentioned here," he said, his voice raspy. "An abandoned mine deep in the Widow's Woods. That's where the children of the eternal night held their rituals, and where the Tenebris is most likely anchored." A cold dread settled in Sarah's stomach. The Widow's Woods, a place she deliberately avoided since childhood. It held a darkness of its own, a darkness fueled by a long-buried memory, the disappearance of her younger brother, Tommy, 10 years ago. She pushed the memory down, refusing to let it cripple her. Fear was exactly what the Tenebris thrived on. Taking a deep breath, she met Mr. Evans' gaze. "We need to go there," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. The journey to the Widow's Woods was fraught with tension. The shadows seemed to grow denser with every passing step, their whispers slithering into Sarah's mind, twisting her memories of Tommy. Images of a frantic search party, a choked sob escaping her mother's lips, and the chilling emptiness of the woods all threatened to overwhelm her. Finally, they reached the entrance of the abandoned mine, a gaping maw in the side of a towering cliff face. The air hung heavy with the smell of damp earth and decay, a fitting prelude to the horrors that awaited them within. Armed with flashlights and a growing sense of dread, they ventured into blackness. The mine was a labyrinth of tunnels, each twist and turn revealing further evidence of the forgotten cult. Crude symbols were etched into the rough-hewn walls, and the floor was littered with skeletal remains, their bones gnawed clean by time. Deeper they went, the air growing colder and thicker. Sarah felt a prickling sensation at the back of her neck, a sense of being watched by unseen eyes. Then, a flicker of movement in the distance caught her eye. A dark shape darted between the support beams, its form shifting and blurring in the weak flashlight beam. Panic bubbled up inside Sarah, threatening to consume her. It was then, in this suffocating darkness, that the Tenebris finally revealed itself. A swirling vortex of pure darkness coalesced in the distance, its edges tinged with an eerie, malevolent red glow. Tendrils of inky blackness lashed out, reaching for Sarah, whispering promises of oblivion. This wasn't just some natural phenomenon. This was pure evil, feeding on her deepest fear, the unresolved grief of her brother's disappearance. Sarah gritted her teeth, channeling her terror into a steely resolve. They had to get out. They had to find a way to fight back. Chapter 5. Embers of Hope in the Abyss. Sarah stumbled backward, the tendrils of darkness writing in the air before her. Fear, raw and primal, threatened to consume her. The image of Tommy, his freckled face and gap-toothed grin flashed in her mind, his laughter echoing in the stifling silence of the mine. "Don't let it win," Mr. Evans' voice cut through the terror, a lifeline thrown into the chaos. He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "It feeds on your fear, Sarah. Fight back." His words snapped Sarah out of her paralyzing terror. She clenched her fists, channeling her grief and fear into a burning ember of defiance. The tendrils of darkness recoiled, as if struck, their malevolent red glow flickering with uncertainty. Backed by Mr. Evans' knowledge from the ancient text, a desperate plan began to take shape. The children of the eternal night had used rituals to bind the Tenebrous. Perhaps they could reverse the process, banish the entity back to the darkness from whence it came. But the ritual demanded a sacrifice and offering of pure light to counter the Tenebrous's suffocating darkness. Mr. Evans, his weathered face etched with grim determination, revealed a hidden compartment in his backpack, a lantern filled with a strange, luminous oil. "This oil," he explained, his voice hoarse, "is blessed by the Reverend at the old church. It's a long shot, but it might be enough to tip the scales." A lump formed in Sarah's throat. The lantern, their only hope, represented a painful sacrifice. It was a family heirloom, passed down through generations, a comforting symbol of warmth and light in her darkest moments. Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes, but she knew what she had to do. "Take it," she whispered, handing the lantern to Mr. Evans. "We fight back together." The ritual, a complex dance of symbols and forgotten prayers, took its toll. Each whispered word felt like a shard of glass in Sarah's throat, each gesture fueled by her mounting exhaustion and a growing sense of dread. Just as they reached the climax of the ritual, a guttural scream tore through the darkness. A figure emerged from the shadows, Billy Thompson, his eyes gleaming with a manic light. Driven mad by the Tenebrous, he lunged at Mr. Evans, his hands clawing for the lantern. In the ensuing struggle, the lantern fell, shattering on the rough ground. The blessed oil spilled out, igniting a small, defiant pool of light against the encroaching darkness. Mr. Evans shoved Billy back, but the young man's touch, tainted by the Tenebrous, sent a jolt of dark energy coursing through Mr. Evans' body. A choked gasp escaped Mr. Evans' lips, his once steady gaze flickering with fear. He crumpled to the floor, the darkness spreading like a stain across his skin. With a final heart-wrenching cry, he was gone, consumed by the very entity he'd tried to fight. Sarah watched in horror. Tears streamed down her face, a mixture of grief and anger. Mr. Evans' death served as a stark reminder of the true cost of this fight, a cost that was quickly becoming unbearably high. But defeat wasn't an option. The flickering pool of blessed oil offered a sliver of hope, a testament to Mr. Evans' sacrifice. Gritting her teeth, Sarah steeled her resolve. The Tenebrous hadn't won yet. Not by a long shot. Chapter 6. Fractured Reality. Sarah stumbled back from Mr. Evans' lifeless body, a raw scream tearing from her throat. The darkness, emboldened by its victory, surged forward, its tendrils wrapping around her ankles, dragging her towards the swirling vortex at its center. She fought back, the flickering pool of blessed oil, a beacon in the suffocating gloom. Its light, fueled by Mr. Evans' sacrifice and Sarah's own desperate hope, held the darkness at bay for a moment. But the darkness was relentless. It wormed its way into her mind, whispering insidious doubts and fears. Images from her past flashed before her eyes, her parents' tear-streaked faces after Tommy's disappearance, the taunts of classmates who blamed her for his loss, the suffocating guilt she'd carried for years. "It's your fault," the shadows hissed, their voices a chilling chorus. "You let him disappear. Now everyone will pay." A wave of nausea washed over Sarah, threatening to pull her under. The line between reality and twisted memories blurred. Was this real? Or was the darkness feeding on her deepest insecurities, warping her perception? A scream pierced the oppressive silence, shattering the fragile hold on her sanity. It was Mrs. Abernathy, her face contorted with terror. She clutched a butcher knife, its blade glinting wickedly in the faint light. You took him," she shrieked, her voice a ragged cry. "You took my Billy." Before Sarah could react, Mrs. Abernathy lunged, her eyes filled with a feral gleam. The Tenebris, it seemed, wasn't just content to feed on fear, it actively manipulated it, turning neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend. Havenwood echoed with the sounds of chaos. Shrieks and gunshots ripped through the night, punctuated by the chilling moans of the afflicted. From her vantage point in the mine, Sarah could see tendrils of darkness writhe across the town, infecting homes, twisting minds. Panic threatened to consume her. This wasn't a battle she could fight alone. But Mr. Evans, the only one who truly understood the darkness, the only one who could help her, was gone. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back. There was no time for grief. Not yet. The blessed oil continued to sputter, the precious liquid dwindling with every passing moment. A desperate plan began to take shape in Sarah's mind, a gamble fueled by a cocktail of grief, defiance, and a glimmer of hope. It was a dangerous plan, one that could very well cost her life. Yet, as she stared at the swirling vortex of darkness and the chaos it had unleashed upon Havenwood, Sarah knew she had no other choice. She would confront the Tenebris head-on, even if it meant becoming consumed by the very darkness she sought to banish. Chapter 7: Embers of Light. The blessed oil sputtered its last, its faint glow barely a whisper against the encroaching darkness. Sarah stood alone, the weight of responsibility a crushing burden on her shoulders. Mr. Evans was gone, consumed by the very entity they sought to banish. Havenwood, a once idyllic town, now echoed with the chilling symphony of terror. But despair was a luxury she couldn't afford. The text held the key, a desperate gamble Sarah clung to with unwavering determination. The ritual spoke of a hidden chamber within the mine, a place where sunlight, even the faintest ray, could weaken the Tenebris. Fueled by a cocktail of grief and defiance, Sarah navigated the treacherous tunnels, the darkness clinging to her like a shroud. Her breaths echoed in the silence, broken only by the dripping of water and the unsettling scuttling of unseen creatures. Finally, she reached a dead end. Frustration gnawed at her, but then she noticed a faint glint on the rough-hewn wall, a hidden latch. With trembling hands, she forced it open, a sliver of hope blossoming in her chest. Beyond the latch lay a narrow passage, barely wide enough for her to squeeze through. It led upward, a faint ethereal light filtering down from somewhere above. With renewed energy, Sarah crawled through the claustrophobic tunnel, emerging into a hidden chamber bathed in a soft golden glow. Sunlight, filtered through a crack in the earth's crust, illuminated a small, crystal-clear pool. This was it, the key to her desperate plan. The ancient texts spoke of channeling sunlight through the pool, amplifying its power to banish the darkness. But reaching the pool was no easy feat. It lay on a precarious ledge overlooking a bottomless chasm, the faint glow barely reaching its edges. Taking a deep breath, Sarah inched her way forward, the rock beneath her feet crumbling with every step. Just as she reached the ledge, a guttural roar filled the chamber. The Tenebris, sensing her defiance, erupted from the depths of the mine, a swirling vortex of pure darkness, tinged with an unholy red, solidified into a grotesque humanoid figure. Its eyes, burning embers in the gloom, seemed to pierce into Sarah's very soul. This wasn't just an entity of shadow. It was a being of pure hatred, a manifestation of humanity's darkest fears. It spoke in a voice that scraped against her sanity, promising oblivion and eternal despair. But Sarah wouldn't back down. She cupped her hands, scooping up a handful of the crystal-clear water. As she held it up to the faint sunlight, the water shimmered, radiating a blinding light that pushed back against the encroaching darkness. The Tenebris shrieked, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality. It lunged for Sarah, tendrils of darkness writhing towards her. But it was too late. With a final surge of defiance, Sarah flung the water towards the vortex. Sunlight, amplified 1,000-fold, bathed the chamber in an incandescent glow. The Tenebris recoiled, its form dissolving into wisps of smoke that were sucked back into the chasm from whence it came. Silence descended, heavy and oppressive. The faint, golden light from above seemed brighter, almost triumphant. Sarah collapsed on the ledge, exhaustion claiming her. But as she lay there, the weight of the world lifting from her shoulders, she knew one thing for sure: Havenwood wouldn't be the same. The scars of the darkness would remain, a chilling reminder of the battle fought and the sacrifice made. But for now, the light had won. And as the first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, bathing the town in a soft, hopeful glow, Sarah knew that Havenwood, though forever changed, would rise again. Chapter 8: Whispers in the Dawn. The first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of rose and gold, casting long shadows across the ravaged town of Havenwood. Sarah emerged from the hidden chamber within the mine, her body racked with exhaustion, but a flicker of hope burning in her eyes. The air, once thick with the suffocating presence of the Tenebris, now felt clean and crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp earth. Havenwood, however, bore the ugly scars of the battle. Houses lay abandoned, their windows boarded up like vacant eyes. The once manicured lawns were brown and overgrown, the silence broken only by the mournful cries of crows. The survivors, a haggard collection of faces etched with fear and loss, gathered in the town square, their gazes filled with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. As Sarah approached, a hush fell over the crowd. She was no longer just Sarah Miller, the girl who left Havenwood years ago. She was the one who had faced the darkness, the one who, perhaps, had saved them all. The weight of their stares was a heavy cloak on her shoulders. Physically, she was exhausted, her body bruised and battered from her ordeal. But the true toll resided within the lingering dread, the chilling memories of the Tenebris' whispers, and the gnawing uncertainty of whether they had truly won. The following days were a blur of activity. Search parties combed the town for the missing, the injured were tended to, and the first steps towards rebuilding began. Sarah, despite her own exhaustion, found herself drawn to helping others, a small act of defiance against the despair that threatened to consume them all. One evening, as Sarah sat by the flickering fire at the makeshift relief center, a weathered hand touched her shoulder. It was Mrs. Peabody, the once vibrant owner of the bakery, her eyes filled with a haunted sadness. "You brought the light back, Sarah," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper, "but a part of the darkness." She trailed off, her gaze flickering towards the boarded-up windows of the abandoned houses. It lingers, doesn't it? Like a chill in the bones, a memory that won't fade. Sarah didn't respond. Mrs. Peabody's words echoed a truth Sarah couldn't deny. The darkness might be contained, but its tendrils had left an indelible mark on Havenwood, a constant reminder of its vulnerability. As days turned into weeks, a fragile normalcy began to return. Laughter, albeit a little hollow, filled the air once more. But the shadows seemed to grow longer at dusk, and the wind carried an unsettling whisper, a chilling echo of the Tenebrous' voice. One starlit night, Sarah stood on the porch of her childhood home, the silence broken only by the chirping of crickets. Looking up at the vast expanse of the night sky, she felt a prickling sensation at the back of her neck. A single star, larger and brighter than the others, seemed to pulsate with an unnatural light. A shiver ran down her spine. Was it just a trick of the light, or was it a flicker of something more sinister? The events of the past weeks had sharpened her senses, leaving her forever attuned to the whispers in the dark. The darkness no one saw coming, the legend had called it. But perhaps, Sarah thought with a steely resolve, it wasn't truly gone. Perhaps it was merely waiting for the right moment to return. And this time, they would be ready.